Much like the wide receiver rankings in Week 11 fantasy football, the running backs in Week 11 fantasy football, we've got a lot of the key guys back this week. We've got DeAndre Swift back. We've got Isaiah Pacheco back. We've got some big-time guys back in the lineup today, and you already know what we have to do in preparation for Week 11. We're going through the top 30 running back rankings for Week 11 fantasy football, guys. And I just hit 7,500 subscribers, and I have you to thank for it. So to show my appreciation, go down there in the comments, give me your hottest take for Week 11 fantasy football for a chance to win the free FFN white hat I got on my head right now, guys. And the only way to qualify is to like the video and subscribe to the channel to make sure you're showing support. So let's go ahead and just dive right into these matchups right now. So the first matchup we've got on the list right here, Christian McCaffrey is still in his own tier. It really shouldn't come as much of a surprise, right? Christian McCaffrey is simply just too elite of a fantasy player not to have here in his own tier on a weekly basis. He's the most matchup-proof guy there is in fantasy football. Taking on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers defense, this is going to be a matchup that he's going to be able to take advantage of. Because as we get further down this list right here, you're going to see how much of a point disparity there is between Christian McCaffrey and all the other running backs. It's massive. Nobody else lives up to the hype that Christian McCaffrey does. Number two, starting out in the second tier, I've got a hot take on this one, if you want to call it that. Raheem Mostert this week. I love Raheem Mostert this week. Taking on the Las Vegas Raiders. So here's the thing that I love about Raheem Mostert, is that Raheem Mostert is obviously capable of going on for a big game anytime because he's on the best offense, the most explosive offense in football. That's out of the way. We all know that. But the chance that Etienne comes back this week increases Raheem Mostert's stock to me, because when you look at what he did with Etienne, that was a huge upgrade for Raheem Mostert. He was a lot more efficient because he had another electric, dynamic running back with him. That's a big deal right there. I have to have Raheem Mostert here at number two because I just love the matchup and I love the situation this week. Austin Ekeler at number three. Austin Ekeler this week taking on the Green Bay Packers. Not only is the matchup fantastic, in fact, both Steelers running backs last week, Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren, they put up over 150 yards on him. So Green Bay is 100% beatable. And obviously Austin Ekeler's all alone. And he's just the easiest guy to guarantee a touchdown for. I'm not big on guaranteeing touchdowns for players week to week. It's hard not to with Austin Ekeler. He's just fantastic as a fantasy football player. And this week against the Packers, nothing changes. Travis Etienne at number four, coming off his worst game since week 4, taking on the Tennessee Titans in Jacksonville. So Travis Etienne, along with all of the other Jacksonville Jaguars, had a bad game. Trevor Lawrence had a bad game. Travis Etienne had a bad game. Evan Ingram had a bad game. Calvin Ridley has had bad games. Not just that game. Christian Kirk was the only bright spot. Travis Etienne, though, when you look at his numbers, he's getting the same amount of opportunities on a per-game basis as Christian McCaffrey. Now, obviously, he's not as efficient as Christian McCaffrey is, but you can see on the screen, he's at 8 touchdowns this season, and that's in 9 games. So he's basically averaging a touchdown per game. Last week, he didn't have one. So Travis Etienne, to me, is just a great option. Every time, every week of fantasy football, but especially in this week, I think that he's going to rebound against the Tennessee Titans. David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs are back-to-back. Yes, that's right. Back-to-back this week. And I love them both so much this week because they're taking on the Chicago Bears. So the first part of this is obvious. Everybody knows this. Detroit's offensive line is elite level. That's the reason that at least one of these Detroit running backs is going to be up here in the top 10 most of the time. The number 2 reason is because their offense is elite. Everybody knows that as well. But did you know that last week, Jahmyr Gibbs actually out-touched David Montgomery? He actually did. They both had great fantasy games because that's what this offense is capable of doing. This offense is capable of running through you, and this week against Chicago, I love both of them. Now, the reason I have Montgomery one spot above Jahmyr Gibbs is because I believe personally that with that injury that Montgomery was recovering from, that was why he had a little bit less of a workload. If I had to guess, Montgomery gets maybe a couple more touches than Jahmyr Gibbs in this Sunday versus the Chicago Bears. Josh Jacobs at number 7. And Josh Jacobs taking on the Miami Dolphins. Josh Jacobs this week, what I really have been encouraged with watching him without McDaniels rather, is that he looks honestly like he wants to be there more. He really didn't look like he wanted to be there. It's kind of the Devonta Adams situation where it's like, you've got two great, talented offensive players that are just, don't feel respected. And that's evident now because Josh Jacobs says he feels more respected with Antonio Pierce as the head coach. So Josh Jacobs, to me, when you look at the efficiency, it's still a worry for sure. And he wasn't exactly fantastic against the Jets. He didn't have exactly a great game. 2 fumbles in that game as well. So Josh Jacobs, there's always going to be a level of uncertainty for me personally because he's still not that efficient and the offense still isn't that fantastic. But against the Miami Dolphins this week, this is a defense that just simply is just not very talented, guys. I like Josh Jacobs this week. Etienne at number 8. I'll tell you what, man. If Etienne plays this week, fire him up. Throw him right back into your lineup. Now, the Miami Dolphins, it's important to monitor this throughout the week. The Miami Dolphins activated him, opened his 21-day window. Didn't activate him, I'm sorry. They opened his 21-day practice window. Now, I'm filming this on early Wednesday morning, so I don't have any practice news on if he practiced on Wednesday or not. So watch this one as it goes, and we will also do the normal must-start and sit running backs video on Saturday where we will have much more information, so stay tuned for that video. But as of right now, if Etienne plays, you gotta play him. He's just too explosive right now. He was too explosive when we last saw him to put him on your bench. Kenneth Walker and Derrick Henry, back-to-back at number 9 and 10. Now, Kenneth Walker's taking on the Los Angeles Rams. The Los Angeles Rams are one of the worst defenses against the run, one of the worst against the pass, one of the worst in general. And Kenneth Walker, as I predicted last week, had a fantastic bounce-back game, largely led by one big play against the Washington Commanders last week. But he still did it. And I said at the time, in the running back rankings video last week, I said, if Kenneth Walker doesn't have a good game, we'll have a come to Jesus moment. I mean, we didn't have to do that today because Kenneth Walker had a great game. And I expect him, with 19 carries last week, to have a very similar workload this week against the Rams. And it's a much easier matchup than the Washington Commanders were, and they were easy too. Derrick Henry. This is a situation where I think with Derrick Henry, bad week for sure. He's had a history of success against Jacksonville. Derrick Henry it's hard to kind of predict what's going to happen, but from what I've seen, I've been studying the Tennessee Titans pretty closely this season. What I've seen from them is that whenever Tennessee has really, they get blown out or they're losing, that's when Tyjae Spears starts to handle the ball more, and he's in there more. Derrick Henry last week had a light workload. Now, I think that Jacksonville will win this game, but I do think that with it being a divisional matchup, there will be a concerted effort to get Derrick Henry involved, and that's why he's here at 10. Isaiah Pacheco, DeAndre Swift, back-to-back in my rankings this week, and they're taking on each other in the Super Bowl matchup rematch, guys. I can't wait, first of all, as a football fan to watch this game. I am so excited because not only is it a rematch, this could be a preview of the Super Bowl this year, 100%. So it's going to be a super interesting game to watch, and I think that both running backs will do well this week. Isaiah Pacheco, DeAndre Swift, you can see the numbers on the screen. They're both over 4 yards per carry. They're both averaging right around 14 to 15 attempts per game. And they're both averaging about 3 to 4 targets per game. So there's not many differences here. The only reason I have Pacheco one spot higher is because I do think Kansas City will win this game. And I think that they're going to have a very strong offensive game plan coming off the bye because Andy Reid is excellent off a bye week. Excellent. And Philadelphia is obviously great. I'm not discounting them. DeAndre Swift's right behind him, but Kansas City has a very, very stout defense as well. Philadelphia is not the only stout run defense on this matchup. Isaiah Pacheco, DeAndre Swift don't make much of the rankings. You can fire both of them off. Saquon Barkley at 13 and Brian Robinson at 14. Again, same matchup. They're playing each other. Saquon Barkley, the only reason I have him here above Brian Robinson is because he's the whole offense. That's the only reason. Saquon Barkley, my fears came true last week against the Dallas Cowboys. It was a bad game. It wasn't a game that you could go in, you could come out of thinking like, man, there's a lot of upside still here, right? It's hard. It's hard to feel that way after that. It's important to keep in mind he was playing the Dallas Cowboys. That's what's important to keep in mind, because I said it last week. I said the same thing today, which is that Saquon Barkley's offense is so low upside that if he wasn't the 3-down back, he wouldn't be up this high in rankings consistently. He is the 3-down back, and he's the entire offense. Brian Robinson is not week to week. That's the only reason. But Brian Robinson, the matchup is just as good against the Giants defense. Brian Robinson, to me, still a great play, but I just prefer Saquon Barkley slightly because we know what he's going to get with his workload. Bree Hall at 15. Bree Hall is getting harder and harder to predict right now. And Bree Hall is taking on the Buffalo Bills this week. Now, when you look back to the first matchup versus Buffalo and the Jets this year, Bree Hall had a great game. Why was that? Well, because he hit on a couple big plays. And when you look at Bree Hall throughout the season, that's how he gets his fantasy production. There's not much volume and consistency with carries because the offensive line is not good and there's no balance to this offense. This defense is no. As long as we stop Garrett Wilson and as long as we stop Bree Hall, we're going to be fine. There's no emphasis on the passing game. It's all making sure Bree Hall doesn't pop off for a big run because he's capable of it. Now, I think that just for the simple reason that he's capable of big plays, that's why he's one spot above James Conner at 16. And James Conner's taking on the Houston Texans. That's a better matchup than Bree Hall has. James Conner also came back, immediately handled the workload. Immediately. 16 carries right out of the gate. So I don't worry about his workload whatsoever. And he looked pretty good. And you can see the numbers on the screen. When he's played, very efficient running back. Very, very efficient. And he's just consistently one of their best weapons. So James Conner is going to consistently stay in this range because I think that Kyler just opens up so much more for the offense than any of their quarterbacks did previous to Kyler this year. James Conner's still a good option, though. James Conner is a good option this week against Houston. I would fire him up in most cases. Let me tell you about Mr. Javante Williams at 17 here. Javante Williams taking on the Minnesota Vikings. Let me just start this off with saying I think I might have been wrong. A couple of weeks ago, I did a video about players to avoid for your fantasy football playoffs, and I had Javante Williams in there. Now, the reasoning why is because the main reason was because I just didn't believe in this Denver Broncos offense. They were just coming off a good performance versus the Chiefs, and I was like, big deal. Like, that's a divisional matchup. Things happen like that all the time. But I also did say going into last week that I'll be watching this closely because if they can do it again, they're going to be a very interesting team down the stretch. And they beat the Bills. And they're not an explosive offense. That's why Javante's ceiling will be capped regardless. It will be capped to a certain point. But 2 straight weeks of handling 25 plus touches, Javante Williams is going to continue to rise up my rankings if this offense continues to improve and continues to run efficiently. And the better the matchup, he'll be higher on this list as long as he maintains the volume. Tony Pollard at 18. You know, Tony Pollard is just, it's a disaster zone right now. Last week, I said going into the week, I had Tony Pollard inside the top 12. And I said there's no way he would be here if he wasn't playing the Giants. So I saw this one coming for Tony Pollard. I've been saying for weeks, I'm worried about Tony Pollard. And it was even worse than I thought. He couldn't even do well against the New York Giants. It's a bad situation. And the matchup this week, it's just as good. Carolina Panthers this week in Carolina. It's a bad situation with Tony Pollard. Just from the upside of the matchup, just because he still handles a decent workload, similar to the next guys we're going to discuss. You can play him, but I don't have any excitement. I'll tell you that much. Joe Mixon at number 19 here, taking on the Baltimore Ravens on Thursday night. So Joe Mixon I would have put him above Tony Pollard had the matchup not been so juicy for Tony Pollard and so nerve-wracking for Joe Mixon here, because that's the reality. Joe Mixon's taking on the Baltimore Ravens defense. That's not a good recipe for success. What I will say, and the reason why Joe Mixon I continue to be relatively excited about, the Bengals offense is looking great. Just because they lost last week to the Houston Texans, who are red hot, they still put up a bunch of points on the Texans. Their offense is running fantastically right now. And now, Joe Mixon has been in the end zone for 3 straight weeks. 3 straight. So Joe Mixon's a good option this week. Rashad White, James Cook, back-to-back here. Rashad White starting to separate himself from James Cook. They've been kind of playing, consistently with each other in my rankings. At this point, Rashad White, I'm feeling relatively confident having him ranked consistently over James Cook. Now, James Cook, the thing about James Cook is that he's the more efficient player. I think he's the more explosive player than Rashad White and him. The problem with James Cook right now is I have no idea how this offense is going to run without Ken Dorsey. If you did not know, Bills offensive coordinator, Ken Dorsey, fired after they lost to the Broncos. I don't know what's going to happen. Is he going to get more opportunities? Is he going to get less? I've got no idea. That's what makes me nervous. Rashad White, I don't have those questions with, so I got Rashad White at 20 and James Cook at 21. Aaron Jones at 22. I'll be honest here, I wanted to rank him a lot higher. There's 2 reasons I didn't. Aaron Jones taking on the Chargers. They've got a stout run defense here. Now, target-wise, that's the reason I wanted to put him higher, because he gets consistent targets and he's a great playmaker for them. But I read some comments regarding Aaron Jones earlier this week from Matt LaFleur, head coach, and he was not happy with Aaron Jones after their loss to the Pittsburgh Steelers. He called him out in the media. I don't know how the division of labor will go after that, because here's the thing. The Green Bay Packers have made it no secret that they don't want Aaron Jones on this team next year. There's definitely some issues here with Green Bay. That's why he's lower on the list. Aaron Jones, be a little careful this week. Jerome Ford and Gus Edwards are back-to-back. Jerome Ford is just in a situation right now where it's a problem, because the Cleveland Browns just lost Deshaun Watson for the season. Now, was he playing great? Absolutely not. But they're starting Dorian Thompson-Robinson, and he was awful in their first win. His first game against the Ravens several weeks back. Jerome Ford's taking on an already tough defense versus the Pittsburgh Steelers, who is bad against the run. But in a divisional matchup, I don't know how likely it is Jerome Ford's going to have a big game this week, especially when they know they don't have to worry about the pass as much. And then Gus Edwards this week, it's hard to assess, honestly, because he's the lead back. He's now been in the end zone for 3 straight weeks, 6 touchdowns the past 3 weeks. Guy's on fire right now from a fantasy football perspective. The problem is, though, there is the emergence of Keaton Mitchell, who is at 25. 25 Keaton Mitchell, you can see the numbers on the screen. There's no volume whatsoever. The efficiency is through the freaking roof. It's really got a feel a little bit of a lower ceiling Miami Dolphins running back field with Raheem Mostert and Etienne. That's the feeling we're kind of getting right now. Gus Edwards still handling the majority of the workload. That's why I have him above Keaton Mitchell. But Keaton Mitchell is just so efficient right now. And I read comments before I filmed this video that John Harbaugh is planning to get Keaton Mitchell more involved against the Cincinnati Bengals on Thursday night. We'll have to see. If I had to choose, I would choose Edwards over Keaton Mitchell, but it's not that far off. Jaylen Warren at 26 here. Jaylen Warren, there's a couple reasons for this. So Jaylen Warren, if you did not hear, he was named the starter by Mike Tomlin. Now, when you looked at that, he was named the starter before the game on Sunday versus the Packers in Week 10. Now, if you looked at what happened in that game, him and Najee Harris still had basically the same amount of work. So, starter by name, is he really the starter? I don't think so. I don't. They both are still getting opportunities here. So, yeah, Jaylen Warren might start out on the field first against Cleveland this week, but Najee Harris still probably will be involved. But nonetheless, Jaylen Warren's very efficient, and if he can handle a little bit more work, I've got him here at 26 because he could start to separate himself more from Najee Harris. Ty Chandler of the Minnesota Vikings here at 27 this week. I tell you what, against the Denver Broncos, there's real potential to boom here. There really is. James Cook just averaged over 10 yards a carry versus the Denver Broncos. They still don't have a very good defense. Now, the problem is that with Alexander Mattison out, how likely are they to run the ball when they already weren't running the ball that much anyways? That is the ultimate problem here from a workload perspective, and that's why he's down low. But I'm just saying, this one has legit potential to boom because Ty Chandler is a more explosive player than Alexander Mattison, and Denver just struggled against a very explosive back in James Cook. Kareem Hunt at 28 here. Kareem Hunt taking on the Steelers. The reality here is that when you look at the workload, again, it's favoring Jerome Ford by a lot, but Kareem Hunt's finding the end zone. So he's still maintaining a spot here in the top 30. But, you know, you can't ignore the efficiency levels. If he doesn't get in the end zone, he's not giving you a good week at all, in the slightest. And you can see on the screen, he's got 6 touchdowns this year. Keep in mind, he has not been with the team he hasn't been with the team for 10 games. Kareem Hunt is interesting because of the touchdown upside. Najee Harris and Devin Singletary rounding it out inside the top 30 at 29 and 30. Najee taking on the Browns, like I said, when you look at the workload last week after Jaylen Warren was declared the starter, they were still very, very similar. So I don't think Najee's just going to get benched the whole game. I do think that there's a possibility that Jaylen Warren starts to break away and get more opportunities, but based on last week, I don't think that they're going to just bench Najee Harris outright. I just don't. Najee has been effective the past several games, actually, in fantasy football. That fantasy points per game number, that's rising. The efficiency number, that's rising as well. He just averaged over 5 yards a carry versus the Green Bay Packers. So Najee Harris, to me, definitely still involved, but definitely has to be moved down here a couple of spots behind Jaylen Warren. And then Devin Singletary, the matchup against Arizona, not bad at all. And had a good week last week. Definitely had a good week. Dameon Pierce potentially being back definitely worries me. I don't know how effective he'll be with Dameon Pierce, and it just hasn't been enough. I mean, last week was the only really good week from a Houston running back all year. All year. Not just recently. All year long. That was the best week from a fantasy running back in the Houston Texans backfield. I don't think there's much upside week to week here, and with the potential return of Dameon Pierce, I have a lot of issues this week. And as I do at the end of every single running back ranking video, I give you guys my favorite underdog running back flex option of the week, and this week, I feel pretty good about this one, actually. Now, this guy is considered a backup running back, but when you watch the games, this guy is getting sometimes more opportunities than the starter, and this guy is Rico Dowdle of the Dallas Cowboys, and he's taking on the Carolina Panthers. Now, who is Rico Dowdle? Rico Dowdle is a running back for the Dallas Cowboys, and he has been low-key the power back for the Dallas Cowboys. When they're closer to the goal line, Rico Dowdle's getting more opportunities. And last week, he got in the end zone finally, and he actually had a 70-yard game versus the New York Giants. This week, matchup is just as good as last week. Carolina is horrific. I want pieces in this matchup, and Tony Pollard, I do still have him several spots above, but Rico Dowdle, I am super excited. I think it's the perfect underdog running back flex option of the week. So let me know what you think of these rankings in the comments below and what questions you need answered for Week 11 Fantasy Football. And if you want to see the top 30 wide receiver rankings for Week 11 Fantasy Football, click on this video right here.